It started with a voice, not a scream, not a cry, just a whisper, soft, curious, like a child who wasn't supposed to be there. "Are you looking for me?" Harold Whitmore was knee-deep in the tall grass behind his farmhouse in rural Kentucky, searching for a lost calf. It was 1963, and the land was quiet. The kind of quiet you only notice when it gets broken. He turned. No one. But the whisper came again, closer. He called out, thinking it was his daughter playing tricks, but she was inside, asleep, so he turned back to the fence. And that's when he saw her. A little girl, barefoot, pale, dressed in white but soaked like she'd crawled out of the river. Her hair hung like wet vines stuck to her cheeks. She didn't speak, she just smiled, and vanished. No footsteps, no sound, nothing. Harold ran. Days passed, then weeks, and slowly, people began whispering about the girl in the fields. Local kids gave her a name. Darling, a ghost, they said. A curse, others claimed. By the time the church got involved, it was too late. 3 children had gone missing, all seen last near that same field. All said the same thing before they vanished. "She talks to me at night." One child drew her face in crayon on his bedroom wall. But it wasn't a child's drawing. It looked too real, too knowing. And then, like wind slipping through cracks, more stories emerged. Different towns, different faces. Same girl, same whisper. But why did she come to Harold first? What had he done? And what happens to the ones who see her? And don't run. October 9th, 1963, 2 weeks after the last sighting of Darling. The Whitmore farm was crawling with men in grey uniforms and wide-brimmed hats. The smell hit first, rotting sweet, like old meat in summer heat. Then the deputy shouted from the creek bed. They'd found something. At first it looked like a mannequin, arms twisted wrong, mouth open in a silent scream. But the skin was real, waterlogged, blue. The girl had been dead for days, but the strangest part, there was no sign of struggle, no scratches, no bruises, no dirt under her nails. She just stopped. The local coroner called it spontaneous drowning. Impossible, of course, but no water in her lungs, no cause of death. Her eyes were still open, wide, as if staring at something even in death. A local priest, Father Mallory, was brought in. He insisted the girl be buried on sacred ground. But the moment her coffin was lowered, the sky turned. Thunder cracked, though the forecast was clear. Rain hit hard, violent, unnatural. 3 men swore the coffin rocked from inside. That night, the cemetery gates were found open. The coffin, empty. It was then the whispers spread like wildfire. Folks stopped letting their kids out after dark. Church pews filled, but the fields emptied. Darling had become more than just a ghost story. She was a warning, an omen. And then came the note, slipped under Harold's door, childlike handwriting, smudged in dirt. "You buried the wrong girl." No signature, no tracks outside, just that message. And across town, a second girl disappeared. Same age, same smile in her last photo. Whatever was haunting the fields wasn't done yet, and Harold's nightmares were about to become someone else's reality. In 1964, nearly a year after the first girl vanished, the townspeople believed the curse had faded. Kids were back on their bikes. Fields bloomed again. But deep down, something still lingered in the air, thick and watching, especially in the Whitmore house. Harold's daughter, Lacey, had become different, quiet, pale. She'd sit in front of her mirror for hours, staring, not brushing her hair, not blinking. One night, Harold passed by her room and froze. She was whispering, but not to herself, to the mirror. "Don't worry," she murmured. "I told them not to look at you." When Harold stepped in, she turned, fast, her eyes wide, unfocused. Then she smiled. "Daddy, she says you're next." The mirror behind her fogged up without reason, like breath on glass. Slowly, a handprint appeared from the inside, not hers. That same week, 3 neighbors claimed their children were sleepwalking. All walked toward the old Whitmore barn. All stopped at the same spot in the grass where the first sighting of Darling had occurred. One boy wouldn't wake for days. When he finally did, all he said was, "She's hiding in the glass." The town's new sheriff, not one for superstition, smashed every mirror in the Whitmore home, but the very next morning, Lacey vanished. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing, just her small handprint, on the inside of the mirror, and on the wall, written in what looked like ash, "She's not finished." Darling wasn't just haunting fields anymore. She was learning how to cross over. One reflection at a time. By 1965, the town had changed. Church bells rang louder, but fewer people came. Children stopped humming. Whispers replaced songs. Something ancient had crept into the town's soul. And it sang in silence. It started at the local chapel. One Sunday morning, the choir, 8 children, stood to perform, but no sound came out. Mouths moved, eyes wide, not one note. Then the youngest girl fainted, eyes rolled back, bleeding from the nose. On the back of her hymn book, written in something thick and black, "Let only one voice sing." That night, Father Mallory returned to the chapel alone. He locked the doors, lit the candles, began praying. He never made it to Amen. When they found him the next morning, he was kneeling, frozen, eyes burned black, lips sealed with wax. The crucifix in his hands melted, dripping like tears onto the pulpit. One word etched into the floorboards beneath him: "Darling." And that's when they started hearing her. In the walls. Not footsteps, not knocking, singing. Soft, sweet, but broken. Like a child trying to remember a lullaby through tears. Harold heard it too, in his attic, in the radio static, even through phone lines. It always started the same way. Rockabye. But the rest, distorted, guttural, wrong. Like something ancient mocking the living. And every time the song played, another child went missing. Every single time. The town stopped music altogether. Radios smashed, choir cancelled, even music boxes burned. But she still sang, no longer from the fields, now from inside their homes. Darling didn't just want silence. She wanted to be the only sound left in the world. In the summer of '66, the Sims family moved into a forgotten farmhouse on the town's edge. Cheap land, good space, a fresh start. But their daughter Eliza said the house had a voice. The family brushed it off until she showed them what it said. Late one night, Eliza woke screaming. She said someone was whispering from the floor. Her father ripped up the old planks by her bed, and there, under a loose board, was a tooth. Small, child's, still bloody at the root, wrapped in a scrap of yellowed lace, tied with hair. The very next day, Eliza stopped talking. Not out of fear, but as if she'd forgotten how. Doctors blamed trauma, but her mother knew better, especially when they found more under the house. Not one tooth, not 2. 13, all children's. And every night, the same sound echoed from the crawl space. Tap, drag, giggle, whisper. They set traps, cameras, nothing showed. Until one night, Eliza drew something on the wall, not with crayons, with her teeth. Scraped into the plaster, row by row, was a name. Darling. That same week, townsfolk reported finding baby teeth in their gardens, on porches, in soup pots, and they were always warm, as if freshly pulled. One old woman cracked open her sewing box and screamed. Inside, teeth arranged in a smile, and blinking eyes made from buttons. By fall, children refused to sleep indoors. They pitched tents in yards. One even camped in a tree. Didn't matter. Darling was already inside, gnawing through floorboards, leaving pieces of herself wherever she pleased. She wasn't hunting them anymore. She was collecting them. In 1968, the Thompsons tore down their old storm cellar to build a modern pantry. While digging into the back wall, the youngest son, Caleb, struck glass. Buried behind the stones, they found a sealed mason jar, caked in soot, wrapped in wire. Inside floated something pale, soft, and horribly familiar. A girl's face, mouth open, eyes rolled back, preserved in amber fluid, not a skull, flesh, whole, carved into the lid. She sees you when you sleep. They called the sheriff. The jar was sent to the coroner, but by the time it arrived, it was empty. No face, no fluid, just claw marks on the inside of the glass. That night, Caleb's sister claimed she saw someone crawling out of the pantry wall, a wet face, eyes like buttons, dragging something heavy behind her. When the parents checked, there was nothing, except fingernails embedded in the wood and footprints, bare, small, muddy, leading to Caleb's room. He didn't scream. He just disappeared. No sign, no blood, just the smell of lavender and a single jar on his pillow, sealed tight. Inside, a single tooth. From that day forward, locals started burying jars on their property, filled with salt, bones, hair, prayers scratched on tin. It became a ritual, but it never stopped her. Darling wasn't just a spirit. She was a pattern, embedded into the land like a curse, a rhythm of grief. Every 27 days someone vanished, always at night, always near the woods, and always followed by a sound no one could trace. Clink, 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 as if a jar was being set gently on a windowsill. They say if you hear it 3 times, don't check the window, because by the 4th, she's inside. By the early 1970s, a quiet hysteria gripped the valley. Families started abandoning homes, locking up their children, refusing to speak after sunset, and yet, every 27 days, a child vanished. It was never violent, never loud, just gone. That's when 4 local mothers, each having lost a child, did something desperate. They returned to the house where it all began, the McKinley farm. Legend said that Darling wasn't just haunting it, she was born there. Not biologically, spiritually. They entered through the collapsed barn and broke open the root cellar, long sealed with crosses, rusted chains, and scripture carved into stone. Inside, the walls were slick with mold, but at the center was a crude cradle, empty, and around it dozens of mason jars, some filled with brine, some filled with air, and one, disturbingly, filled with something that breathed. The mothers didn't scream. They prayed. Then they made a pact. 1 child, every 27 days. In exchange, the rest would be spared. A sacrifice. They called it the Root Cellar Pact. Quietly, the town honored it. Every month, an orphan, a stray, a foster kid would go missing, but never a local's own. It brought peace for a while. Until one woman, Mara, the youngest of the 4, broke the chain. She couldn't give up another child, couldn't bear the guilt. So she buried a doll instead, whispering prayers into its button eyes. That very night, her husband's skin peeled off in the bathtub, like wet wallpaper. Her dog was found sealed inside the oven. Her infant son vanished without a sound, and in his crib, a jar, half full, still warm, with her own name scratched into the glass. Mara. From that day on, the pact was never broken again. Darling didn't want revenge. She wanted a rhythm, a life paid forward, a death paid back. In 1975, a new family, the Halloways, moved into the old Avery place just 2 miles from the McKinley farm. They'd heard the stories, but didn't believe in curses, didn't believe in ghosts, didn't believe in Darling, until the walls started whispering. It began with the daughter, Lily, age 9. She claimed the wallpaper hummed when she slept. She heard a girl's voice behind it, soft, wet, and slow. She lives in the jar, she lives in the dark, she lives in the folds of your beating heart. Her parents thought it was imagination, but when they peeled back the paper, they found writing, not printed, but scratched into the plaster with fingernails. She's listening now. Overnight, Lily changed. Her drawings became darker. She'd talk to a corner of the ceiling like it was her friend. She asked to be buried in the cellar to stay safe. And then, she vanished. No broken windows, no open doors, just a pool of cloudy water at the center of her bed, and a strange smell, pickled lavender. That's when the Halloways discovered the whispering wall, a portion of their living room where sound didn't echo, where their dog refused to enter, where, if you pressed your ear against it, you'd hear her. Darling didn't scream, she didn't growl, she invited. "Take off your skin," she'd whisper. "Put your soul in the jar, it's warmer in here." And some people, they listened. That's when experts came, folklorists, psychologists, even a priest. The priest fled after one night. He'd woken with dried brine on his eyelids and mason jar rings embedded in his palms. The wall was sealed with bricks and concrete, but those who've lived there since say the wall breathes. And at 3:03 a.m., it whispers her name. The records are fuzzy, intentionally erased. But in the county archives behind old water-damaged files, there's a torn report from 1962 about a girl named Etta Lou McKinley. She wasn't called Darling back then. She was 13. Mute, born with fused fingers, deep-set eyes, and skin so pale it seemed translucent in moonlight. The midwife called her a thinborn, said she should have never survived. But she did, quietly, until people started dying around her. The doctor who delivered her collapsed from a stroke 3 days later. A boy who teased her drowned in a trough filled with leaves. Her own mother's mouth filled with insects before she went mad. The town whispered, "She's a hex. She ain't got no soul. She's God's mistake." The preacher declared she was a vessel for sorrow, and in that one Sunday sermon they decided she must be returned to the dirt. So, one night, 7 townsfolk came to the McKinley farm. They didn't kill her. They buried her alive, in the root cellar, inside a wooden crate. Nails pounded down while she stared up, silent, no scream, no plea, just watching. Before they sealed the last plank, the sheriff said, "May the dark take what God won't." Then they walked away, and for 13 days the house stayed silent. Until the cellar door unlatched by itself, each of the 7 died in the same way, choked, but not by hands, by glass. Mason jars were found in their homes, shoved down throats, resting in bathtubs, one hanging from a tree filled with a child's laughter. Etta Lou McKinley was never seen again, but that's when the town started calling her Darling. Not out of love, but out of fear. Because sometimes the worst kind of ghost is the one you create yourself. In 1989, a young investigative reporter named Heather Clive arrived in town. She'd heard rumors, mass hysteria, hauntings, buried children, jars filled with brine and teeth. The town called her nosy, but she called it a Pulitzer story waiting to happen. She moved into the abandoned church using it as her base and started digging. Within weeks, she'd collected dozens of first-hand accounts, strange deaths, missing persons, walls that breathed, and recurring dreams of a girl with no eyelids floating in formaldehyde. She traced it all back to a name whispered only once in every interview, Darling. But the deeper she went, the stranger things got. Her recordings played backward. Pages in her journal rewrote themselves. And in every photo she took, a jar appeared. Even when there was nothing there, Heather didn't back down. She recorded a message for her editor. "If this reaches you, know I was right. There's something here, something that lives beneath. I can hear her humming through the floorboards." Then she vanished. The church was found flooded with vinegar, the walls covered in wet handprints, and on the mirror, written in condensation, "You opened the jar." Her body was never found. But the tape she mailed to her editor arrived 2 days later. When he played it, witnesses say blood poured out of the cassette deck. The station aired 30 seconds of her final recording. Viewers across the state reported nosebleeds, seizures, and hallucinations of being drowned in syrup. The broadcast was pulled, all tapes destroyed. Heather Clive's name was wiped from the network's history. But those who were in the town during her visit say they still hear her, sometimes, screaming, laughing, humming, in the static between radio stations. And every year on that date, a jar appears on the church steps, sealed, cold, filled with blonde hair, Dr. Wallace Greaves was a Harvard-trained parapsychologist. Smart, cynical, obsessed with disproving the supernatural. In 1993, he arrived in town with a documentary crew, ready to expose Darling as local folklore, mass hysteria, or religious delusion. He didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in psychological contagion and small-town myth-making. So he brought everything: EMF scanners, audio spectrographs, thermal cameras, EEG headsets. He even sealed the McKinley root cellar with biometric locks and motion sensors. For the first few nights, nothing happened. Then, one of the crew members, Jamie, went missing. They found her boots in the kitchen. The rest of her was discovered folded inside a mason jar, every organ intact, just miniaturized. Dr. Greaves fainted, but it didn't end there. The footage from that night corrupted itself. Greaves's audio logs began to play backward, whispering in a little girl's voice, "Let me out. Let me out. Let me out." One night he stood in front of the camera and said, "I've never believed in hell, but I think it lives here, in this house, and her name is Darling." Then he set himself on fire in the yard. The flames didn't touch the grass, didn't scorch the trees, but his body turned to glass. The documentary was never aired. The crew disbanded, most in therapy, some in psych wards. One joined a monastery in Greenland and hasn't spoken since. But buried in the lab report, found years later in a FOIA request, was one chilling note from Greaves's final experiment. The root cellar isn't a place, it's a mouth, and the jars are her teeth. Since then, no skeptic, no scientist, no thrill seeker has dared return, because it's no longer about belief, it's about survival. The town of Elmridge hit a tipping point. After nearly a century of whispers, deaths, and cover-ups, the town council finally declared it a state emergency. They were tired. Tired of the jars, tired of the whispers, tired of Darling. Mayor Reed Stanford stood before a packed church congregation and vowed, "We will seal the house, burn the root cellar, and cast out this evil for good." That same night, the house was surrounded by men in hazmat suits, torch in hand. They never made it to the front door. Instead, they found themselves marching backward. Something rewrote their memories mid-step. They walked in circles for 11 hours, bleeding from the ears, teeth rattling in their mouths. But that wasn't the worst part. Mayor Stanford, furious, stormed the house himself. Inside, he found a banquet table set with jars, each labeled with a townsperson's name, each filled with something twitching. In the center was his own jar, filled with pale liquid and a floating black tongue. He drank it. Witnesses say his eyes turned all white. He walked back to the church, climbed the pulpit, and began preaching, in Latin, backward. Then his jaw unhinged, and he began coughing up fingers, one by one, severed, childlike, wrinkled as if waterlogged. People screamed, fled, some dropped dead, but a few stayed, hypnotized, listening. Because for the first time in history, Darling spoke through him. "You locked me in the dark, but you fed me with your fear. Now I'm part of your bloodline." Mayor Stanford collapsed. His body crumbled like dried petals. And the jar still sits in the pulpit. Never moved, never touched. It refills itself every spring. Since that night, the town stopped fighting her. No more burning, no more exorcisms, just silence, because Elmridge had learned the truth. You don't escape Darling, you inherit her. By 1999, Elmridge Elementary had 7 missing children, all from the same second-grade class. All vanished without a trace. No footprints, no broken windows, just empty beds and opened coloring books. But the drawings they left behind, that's what chilled the FBI. Each child had drawn the same little girl, white dress, black hair, no face. One image showed her in the corner of the classroom, another under the teacher's desk, but one stood out most. Little Elsie Monroe drew a map. Not of the town, but of the root cellar, in perfect architectural detail. She'd never been there, never seen it. Yet the map matched exactly, even down to the crooked steps and the 6th jar that always twitches. The children had begun calling her the Whisper Friend. They said she played hide-and-seek, but never counted. She just watched. One boy, Marcus Leary, was found in the school bathroom whispering into a vent, "I'll bring you more. Just don't take my mum." He disappeared that night. A substitute teacher, Ms. Rowan, tried to record the kids during nap time. What she caught was horrifying. 13 children speaking in unison, eyes closed. The jar is wide, the jar is deep. She lives inside, she doesn't sleep. Seconds later, all the lights blew out. The footage cut to black. When it came back on, there was one extra child in the room. Black hair, white dress, no face. The school was shut down, the building demolished. But even today, at that corner of town, people say they hear recess bells. And sometimes, laughter from underground. The drawings are still archived at the State Museum, but one has since been removed because it keeps changing. Every year it adds a new child with their name and the date they'll vanish. The next name is smudged, but the date is clear, tonight. The town always believed the root cellar behind the Darling house was just an old food storage pit. But in 2004, during a failed demolition attempt, archaeologists were brought in. They discovered something impossible. The cellar wasn't built in the 1800s. It was prehistoric, older than the town, older than the tribes that once lived there. Carbon dating suggested it was over 12,000 years old. The walls were carved, not with tools, but by hands. Hundreds of tiny handprints, burnt into the stone, fused as if the children who made them were molten when they touched it. Worse, there was no bottom. They dropped a drone down. At 243 feet, its lights flickered. At 666 feet, it lost signal entirely. The footage showed walls lined with shelves, and on those shelves, jars. Thousands, identical to the ones found upstairs. Only these jars didn't just move, they screamed. The audio recorded a chorus of children's voices, layered and endless, repeating the same phrase, "We are kept, we are kept, we are kept." Experts tried to recover the drone. It returned itself, placed neatly on the porch of the local museum 2 nights later, soaked in formaldehyde, its camera lens scratched with a message, "You came too close." After that, the cellar was sealed with concrete. Iron crosses were welded to the entrance. But every 5 years, the concrete cracks, always on the same date, the birthday of Mabel Darling, which doesn't make sense, because Mabel never existed. No birth certificate, no death record, just a name in a ledger and jars full of her whispers. The town now believes the house didn't create the cellar. The cellar created the house and used the Darling family as a vessel, a mask, a story. So we'd stop looking for what was truly beneath. But now, it's waking up. In 1972, a town council meeting was held behind locked doors. No minutes were taken, no press was allowed. But one man, a janitor named Wesley Rowe, left behind a journal. In it he wrote, "We were offered peace in exchange for obedience. The jars stay closed, the cellar sealed, and every 5 years they take one of ours." The council had made a pact. After years of unexplained deaths, plagues and fires, the townspeople agreed to feed the cellar. Volunteers were never named, but children from orphanages, juvenile centers and foster homes were the usual choice. Those no one would miss. Each offering was left inside the Darling house, placed at the top of the stairs, next to a single empty jar. By morning, the child was gone, and the jar was full. With what? No one knew, until a curator dropped one by accident in 1991. He said he saw an entire memory flash before his eyes, a little girl screaming in a hallway lit by gas lamps. He heard the name Mabel, not screamed in fear, but as prayer. Because she wasn't a victim. She was the collector. The jars were vessels. The cellar was her temple. And the pact was the town's damnation. Wesley Rowe's journal ends with a final chilling note. They buried the sin in concrete but forgot to bury the guilt. That guilt now walks, and she's hungry. What's worse, the pact was never broken. Even now, every 5 years, a child goes missing from Elmridge. Authorities label it a runaway. But locals know. They light a candle on the Darling house steps. They leave a jar. And they don't ask questions, because they remember what happened in 1951, when the town skipped the offering. 39 people burned alive. All their names still scratched on the cellar walls. In 2023, a new family moved into the outskirts of Elmridge. They had no idea about the Darling legend until their daughter Ava started speaking in voices that weren't hers. Each night at 3:06 a.m. she'd whisper the same phrase, "Mabel's waiting in the jar room." Concerned, the parents called a contractor to inspect their basement. He never came back up. When the police investigated, they found a tunnel, long, narrow, carved by hand. It led not to the foundation, but to the Darling house, 5 blocks away. Inside, everything was intact. The staircase, the rotting wallpaper, the smell of vinegar and decay. And in the jar room, one final jar, larger than all the others, still sealed. Taped to its lid, a note written in childlike scrawl, "For the one who broke the pact." Suddenly, the air shifted. Every other jar began rattling violently, as if the souls inside were screaming in warning. The officers ran, but the little girl stayed. She walked calmly to the center of the room and smiled. "I'm not Ava," she said. "I'm what she was keeping out." And with that, the last jar cracked open. What emerged didn't have a form, just darkness. It spread across the floor, swallowing everything in its path. By morning, the house was gone, not destroyed, missing. In its place, a hole, deep, cold, breathing. Locals say if you lean over it, you'll hear the voices of every child the town sacrificed, whispering, laughing, inviting. Today, the town of Elmridge is abandoned, wiped off maps, no highway signs, no records. Just one message spray-painted on a nearby road sign. She doesn't want offerings anymore. She wants witnesses. And if you ever find a glass jar on your porch, don't open it. Because you're not just being watched, you're being counted.